You don't belong here. The officer's words sliced through the air, as cold and cutting as the bitter wind of a Chicago afternoon. Captain Tasha Richardson stood frozen, the spit from Officer Alex Carver landing with an audible splat on her sneaker. Around them, the bustling street corner went silent in shock. Phones began to rise, capturing every second, every cruel moment. This was more than just a public assault. It was a deliberate attempt to humiliate. But the crowd had no idea who stood before them. Tasha had seen it all, the prejudices, the corruption, the abuse of power, but nothing had prepared her for this. Not today, not in front of so many witnesses. You think you're above the law, don't you? Carver sneered, his breath laced with stale coffee. Probably stole that car too. She wiped her shoes slowly, her fingers steady, her eyes never leaving his face. Despite the injustice, despite the fear simmering in her chest, she stood taller than ever. This wasn't the first time she'd been targeted, but today would be the last time Officer Alex Carver thought he could get away with it. What they didn't know, what no one knew, was that Captain Tasha Richardson wasn't just another citizen walking the streets of Harborview Heights. She wasn't just an ordinary woman enjoying her day off. She was a force, a voice for justice from within the very system that had allowed Carver's actions to go unchallenged for so long. But in that moment, she had to be more than just a cop. She had to be a symbol. Hours earlier, she had woken up in her cozy townhouse, far from the chaos of her daily grind in the Internal Affairs Division. The soft hum of her phone beside her bed was the only thing that had disturbed the peace. Her daughter's text popped up on the screen. "Good luck at Riverstone today, Mom. Proud of you." Tasha smiled as she looked at the casual clothes laid out on the chair. Faded jeans, a Riverstone hoodie, and canvas sneakers. Today, Captain Tasha Richardson didn't exist. Today, she was just Tasha, a guest speaker at a university lecture. The drive through the city had felt like crossing two worlds. From the elegant streets of Harborview Heights to the poorer, divided neighborhoods of Chicago, Tasha saw it all. She couldn't help but notice the increased police presence on her route. 3 patrol cars in 4 blocks. A familiar face appeared at the corner of her eye, and she immediately recognized Officer Carver's bulky figure. His notorious reputation preceded him. The man who had terrorized neighborhoods and kept getting away with it, no matter how many complaints were filed against him. She had heard the rumors. Carver was untouchable, protected by his connections to Carson Mitchell, the union president. They called him the Intimidator, and for years, his tactics had gone unchecked. Tasha's stomach turned as she entered Grounded Cafe on Clark Street, ordering her usual dark roast from Ms. Lorraine Jackson, who had been a longtime friend. But when the conversation turned to Carver's latest actions, giving out tickets to black patrons for double parking outside the cafe, Tasha knew something had to be done. "He needs to be stopped," Ms. Jackson had said, her hands clenched in anger. "Someone needs to stop him." Tasha had promised her, someone will. But as Tasha walked her car hours later, she had no idea that she would be the one to stop him. The Honda Accord was parked carefully, no sign of vanity, nothing to indicate her true identity. Just another black professional navigating the city. But as she approached her car, the sight of Carver's patrol car blocking her froze her in place. The officer was standing by her vehicle, writing in his ticket book, casting a long shadow over the street. His uniform was crisp, militant, the kind of officer who believed respect came from fear. "You got a problem with me, officer?" Tasha's voice was calm, but internally, she could feel the tension rising. "Your meter's expired," Carver said dismissively, his pen scratching aggressively on the ticket book. But Tasha knew the meter still had 15 minutes left. "It's still green. I'm within my time." The officer's eyes narrowed, and Tasha knew the trap was set. One wrong word, one misstep, and the night could turn violent. "Don't talk back, lady. I'm just doing my job," Carver growled, stepping closer, pushing his authority to the edge. The crowd began to gather. Whispers filled the air, but Tasha remained calm, holding her ground. The light from the street lamps cast long shadows on the asphalt, the tension in the air palpable. "May I document the meter?" Tasha asked slowly, reaching for her phone, making sure the crowd could see her every move. Carver's hand shot to his belt, and the sudden motion sent a jolt of fear through her. He had already pulled his gun once today in what seemed like an ordinary ticket stop. She froze, her heart pounding. What would happen next? Put the phone down. Now. And just like that, the entire situation escalated. The rest of the world around her seemed to fade as Carver's hand tightened around his gun. This was it. The moment everything changed. The street was thick with tension as Tasha stood motionless, her hands visible at her sides. The heat from the midday sun mixed with the looming presence of Carver, whose grip on his weapon tightened. The hum of the crowd seemed distant, almost as if time itself was suspended, waiting for the next move. "Don't make me tell you again, lady," Carver spat, his voice dripping with venom. "You want to record? You want to play your little games? I'll show you how this ends." The words rang in Tasha's ears like a warning bell. She had to remain calm. She had to maintain control. She was no stranger to this kind of power play. But this time it was different. This time it was personal. He was crossing a line, and she could feel it in the pit of her stomach. But she refused to back down. "I'm not breaking any law, officer. I'm simply documenting my rights," she said, her voice unwavering. Around them, the growing crowd had their phones out, capturing everything. They were witnesses whether they realized it or not. The scene was unfolding in front of them like a tragic, scripted drama, one that was all too familiar in this neighborhood, yet shocking in its audacity. Ms. Lorraine Jackson appeared from the cafe, her small frame almost hidden behind the bulk of Carver's patrol car. "Officer," she called out, her voice filled with defiance. "I saw her pay the meter myself. You have no right to do this." Carver's eyes flicked toward Ms. Jackson, but he dismissed her with a flick of his wrist, his arrogance palpable. "Mind your business, Grandma, or you're next." But Ms. Jackson wasn't backing down. "I've owned this business for 30 years. This is my street, too. I know my rights." Tasha's jaw clenched, but she couldn't let the distraction divert her focus. She had to stand her ground. The world was watching, and so was the system that had allowed officers like Carver to thrive unchecked for far too long. "May I see your license and registration?" Carver demanded, his tone sarcastic. Tasha's fingers brushed against her wallet, the motion deliberate. She handed over her driver's license. Nothing more than a plain identification that listed her as Tasha Richardson from Harborview Heights. She wasn't wearing the badge of authority right now. She wasn't Captain Richardson of the Internal Affairs Division. To Carver, she was just another black woman who didn't know her place. That was the mistake he was about to make. "Fancy name for a fancy girl," Carver mocked as he stared at her ID. "Lincoln Park, huh? Must be some kind of high roller." His words dripped with disdain, but Tasha remained stoic. This wasn't the first time she'd been underestimated by people like him, and it wouldn't be the last. "Your kind always thinks you're special," Carver sneered, his face twisted with contempt. "You probably slept your way to that rank. Diversity hire, huh?" The accusation burned, but Tasha swallowed the anger rising in her chest. She'd been through far worse, seen worse. But the difference now was that this time the crowd was witnessing it all, and soon they would see more than just a badge. They would see justice. The crowd was getting restless, and Tasha could feel the weight of their gazes on her. Phones were still recording, capturing every word, every gesture. Tasha had become the symbol of something much bigger than just this ticket. This moment was a spark, one that would ignite something far more powerful than she could have imagined. Then, as Carver's insults continued to rise, something clicked within her. This wasn't just a random encounter. This wasn't just a bad apple officer. This was part of a larger system, a system that had allowed this kind of behavior to fester unchecked for far too long. And as much as she wanted to scream, to fight back with everything she had, she knew the time for that was over. "Am I being detained, officer?" she asked, her voice cool, controlled. It wasn't a question. It was a challenge. His eyes narrowed at her, and for a moment, she saw a flicker of hesitation. But he quickly masked it, growing more hostile by the second. "You're going to regret this," Carver muttered under his breath as he stepped closer, his towering figure looming over her. The smell of stale coffee and cheap cologne flooded her senses, but she refused to flinch. The moment he reached for his radio, her heart skipped. This was it, the moment where it could all go terribly wrong. She stood there, her hands steady at her sides, waiting for whatever was coming next. The seconds seemed to stretch into infinity. Then, with a sudden violent motion, Carver grabbed her wrist, twisting it behind her back. "You're resisting arrest," he barked, his voice full of fury. But Tasha wasn't resisting. She was being arrested for doing nothing more than asserting her rights. In that moment, everything she'd fought for, the integrity, the discipline, the countless hours spent in the Internal Affairs Division, felt like it was slipping away. But she had no intention of letting this man take it from her. The crowd, still recording, began to murmur, some voices rising in anger, others in disbelief. One voice cut through the noise. A young man in a Riverstone University sweatshirt stepped forward, his jaw set in determination. "Officer, what's going on here?" he demanded, his voice steady but filled with righteous anger. "You can't just arrest someone like this." Carver's eyes snapped to the young man, his face turning a deep shade of red. "Get back, kid. I'll arrest you too." The crowd was growing, and the pressure on Carver was mounting. He was losing control. But it wasn't just the crowd's presence that was changing the dynamics. It was something else, something even Carver couldn't have foreseen. The moment hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. Carver's grip on Tasha tightened, but his confidence was starting to crack. He was no longer the officer in control of the situation. He was the one being watched. And he could feel the weight of those gazes, the phones recording, the crowd murmuring. But Tasha didn't flinch. She stood firm, her shoulders straight, her eyes unwavering. The tension between them was palpable, every moment of silence more deafening than the last. "You think I'm scared of a bunch of cameras?" Carver snarled, but his voice wavered, a thin thread of doubt creeping in. He knew he was losing control, and that terrified him. Tasha stood still as a rock, refusing to let him see her fear. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for every single person who had ever been crushed under the boot of an unjust system. And in that moment, the crowd understood. They could feel it, too. This wasn't just a confrontation between an officer and a civilian. This was the reckoning. Just then, Officer Ryan Brooks, the younger officer who had been standing by nervously, finally stepped forward. His face was pale, his eyes wide with shock as he glanced between Carver and Tasha. "Brad, maybe we should just stop," he muttered, his voice trembling. Carver's eyes flared with rage. "Shut up, Brooks. You have no idea what you're talking about." His voice was a harsh whisper, but it was laced with fear now. Tasha could see it, the realization that the tide was turning, that his world was about to collapse in front of him. But then, just as Carver reached for his pepper spray, a familiar voice sliced through the tension. "That's enough, Brad." Lieutenant Rodriguez's voice was calm, but filled with authority. He was the first officer to arrive on the scene, his boots hitting the asphalt with purpose. He took one look at the scene, the crowd, the phones, the two officers, and he knew exactly what had happened. Tasha's pulse quickened, but she didn't say a word. Rodriguez had always been a man of integrity, someone who stood by the rules, no matter how difficult they were to enforce. And now, he was about to hold Carver accountable. "Step away from Captain Richardson," Rodriguez commanded, his voice low but unwavering. Carver froze, his eyes wild with panic. "Lieutenant, she's resisting. She spit on me, she—" Rodriguez's eyes didn't even flicker. "You got 5 seconds, Brad. Step back." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of everything that had led up to this moment. Carver's breath came in ragged gasps. He looked around, his eyes darting like a trapped animal, searching for a way out. But there was no escape now. I didn't know who she was," Carver stammered, his face pale. She's not really. That's Captain Richardson," Rodriguez snapped, his voice hard as steel. "And you just assaulted a superior officer." The words hit Carver like a freight train, but the real impact came when Rodriguez's gaze locked on Tasha's, a silent understanding passing between them. This was it, the moment he would face the consequences of his actions. For a split second, everything felt suspended in time. the world holding its breath. And then, the chaos erupted. Tasha's hands were still cuffed behind her back as Carver's knees buckled beneath him, his body giving way to the realization that his career, and possibly his freedom, was slipping through his fingers. He collapsed on the street, the once feared officer now a crumpled mess in front of a growing crowd of witnesses. I didn't mean to, Carver mumbled, his voice breaking as he looked up at Tasha with a mix of humiliation and desperation. Tasha didn't respond. She didn't need to. The entire city was watching now. His words were hollow, his actions irredeemable. As Carver lay there, a pathetic figure on the concrete, the crowd's mood shifted. What had started as a confrontation, one fueled by hatred, power, and arrogance, had now become a moment of collective power. The people on the street had seen all. They had witnessed injustice, and now they were witnessing its downfall. "Officer Carver, you're under arrest," Rodriguez said, his voice steady as he placed handcuffs on the man who thought he was untouchable. The sound of Carver's cuffs clicking into place echoed across the street, the final nail in the coffin of his career. Tasha looked at the crowd, her voice calm but commanding. "This isn't over. This is just the beginning." The crowd cheered, a collective sigh of relief filling the air. They had seen justice in action, and it wasn't just a victory for Tasha Richardson. It was a victory for everyone who had been silenced, ignored, and pushed aside by those in power. As Carver was led away, Tasha stood tall, her gaze unwavering as she spoke into the cameras now trained on her. "This is what happens when the law is for everyone, not just the ones who wear the badge." The sound of sirens approached in the distance. The media vans were coming. The story was going to break wide open. The world was about to know what had just happened on Clark Street. And Carver, for all his arrogance, would soon be just another name in the pile of those who abused their power and got caught. Tasha's phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from her daughter. "You did it, Mom. So proud." Tasha smiled, the weight of the day still pressing on her shoulders, but for the first time in a long while, there was hope in her heart. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more thrilling, cinematic stories just like this one. Now, let's talk about what really matters: accountability. Have you ever witnessed someone in a position of power use it to intimidate or bully others? How did you respond? And what do you think needs to be done to ensure justice is always served? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Remember, sometimes the hardest battles are the ones fought in silence. It's the courage to speak up and demand what's right that makes all the difference. Let's keep this conversation going because together we can make a change.